Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning. Thank you for joining us. I think we're still waiting for a few more people to come in, so let's give it a few minutes. In the meantime, let me just ask the panel, what did you guys do to keep cool last week during the heat wave? Anything bizarre and interesting that you did? Nick, you look like that resonated with you.
No, I just complained a lot. I think typical local government officer, just stressed about it and just awful.
Jonathan, anything interesting?
Oh, Forward, I'm not really sure I've got anything sensible to say on that, except for the fact that it was suggested by a yoga teacher that you grit your teeth and you breathe in through your teeth and it creates a cold breeze. It didn't really work, but it's worth having a go.
It took your mind off the heat anyway.
I think that was the trick.
You have to be in any particular position for that, though. Okay, let's make a start then. Waiting for Tracy to join us. As soon as she does, that'd be great. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us this morning. As I said, the purpose of the call today is to share with you what we have learned over the last 2 years in terms of the challenges that we've faced, to think about some of the risks and the challenges that we've faced going forward to improvement as well, and hopefully to identify what has worked well and what we might need to do to improve. And we've got a great panel here this morning to help me explore those issues. My name is Freud Mir, and I'm a lead consultant with Arum, and I specialise in our local government practice. Let me go around the panel quickly and just ask you to introduce yourself and a bit about your background very quickly. Starting on the top left, let me go with Gary.
Hi everyone, my name is Gary Watson. I'm the, I keep saying Deputy Chief Executive, but I'm the Chief Executive of the IRRV, and I've got the challenge of filling the very large shoes left by David Mager, who thankfully is on the call today, so can obviously step in when I need be. But as I say, I'm very pleased to be here and perhaps share some of my personal experiences with yourselves today. So thank you for it.
Thank you, Gary, and congratulations on the new role. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you a lot more on these calls going forward. Jonathan, you're next on my list.
Morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Waldridge. I'm the Operational Director for Revenues, Benefits and Transactional Centre in the London Borough of Redbridge. A bit like Gary, I've got a new role, formerly the Head of Revenues here. So it's exciting to see a new slant on our revenues work. But underpinning all of that is there's always money to collect, and I'm sticking in that field. So really pleased to be here today, and thanks very much for the welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for making time. I know it's very busy down there. Nick, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, Nick Rowe, Assistant Director for Local Taxation and Exchequer Services at London Borough of Ealing. Much the same as the rest of the guys, really. It's just be interesting today to hear other people's views on the bounce back, or maybe not, as the case may be.
Thank you, Nick. Alistair. You're on mute. That's it. That's the first £10 into the kitty.
Yeah. No.
Oh dear. Oh, we're working. Everything is working. He said a couple of minutes ago. So hopefully we'll get Alistair back at some point. And we're also waiting for Tracy Richard to join us again. She was having slight technical issues joining the call, but hopefully she'll be joining us soon. Right. So those of you who've joined us before will understand the format that we do. I will be passing hopefully some very challenging questions to our panel for them to answer and to give us their take on the subject. But the key thing is you, the audience, and I sound like one of these presenters now, but we've been hearing over the past week or so on TV. You have the opportunity to ask lots of questions. If you look on the right-hand side of your panel, you'll see a Q&A button, and that is a good way of letting the panel know what things you want to hear about. So please ask a question, and I will be looking at those and throwing those to the panel on your behalf. So please feel free to use that. We'll also be having some polls during the course of the webinar. Again, questions that we put out to you to get your views and we'll put that to the panel for their comment as well. And following the webinar, you'll also be sending out a very short survey just to get your feedback on how you think it went this morning and what we can do to improve on these things going forward. So let's start off with the panel again. Alistair, can you still talk, or you? Right. No, it's still on mute. Okay, I'm not sure what we can do about that, but I don't know if Hannah, you can try and do something in the background, but we'll leave that to you. Okay, Jonathan, tell us a little about what the last 2 years have been like for you.
Oh wow, where do you start? I mean, it's been off the scale in terms of a challenge, hasn't it? It's nothing that we've ever seen before. If it wasn't bad enough prior to the pandemic, I guess we were seeing an ever increasing debit rise with a salami slice of resource to try and meet that challenge from the local authority. But I've got to say the pandemic years have probably been the hardest of my career, and I hope we never see anything quite like that again. But on the other side of that, we've got a new normal, which it's really hard to imagine what we did to cope day to day, what was business as usual like. It's hard to actually remember. But we come out of it now with an increased sense of resilience. We've got proven adaptability. I think we've proven that we can adjust our services to deliver and step up services overnight that are robust and fit for purpose, having to think on our feet, and probably going back now to probably we haven't really had the opportunity to test and challenge as we might have done with a bit more time. We had to go for it and get it right first time. And I think on the whole, I'm really proud of the services that we've delivered, and they have been on the whole robust, giving both the assurance to government and to the local authority in terms of risk and processing that we've seen. Over that time, we've taken our services to another level as well. It's surprising we kind of had an ambition to modernise a few areas that were stuck. So we luckily were already on that road prior to the pandemic, but it was easy to continue. We found it easy to continue with that, albeit there were other challenges. But we've introduced automated messages such as text and voice, and using technology where we have the contact details to reach residents. We've had a lot more engagement from residents, which has enabled us to capture those details, and those offers remain really focused on those who are digitally enabled. We've got a challenge that is that really fit for purpose, where there are people who are experiencing digital poverty, and now that's kind of the next level. But I think we've stood up to those challenges, and I think I'm really pleased to say that we probably managed better performance in terms of collection than we'd ever expected. We managed to keep on top of customer demand, and we've got a proven record now that we've got resilient services, and albeit a very exhausted workforce. So I think I'm really pleased of what we have done, and coming out the other side, it's a great way to look back and show members and the public that these services offer good value for money and adaptability in the main.
Thanks, Jonathan. Nick, what have the last 2 years been like for you?
Probably the same as Jonathan, absolute chaos. And I think, we're probably still a long way from anywhere being close to back to where we were previously. The volumes that we've got in terms of backlogs, purely from the amount of resource we've had to put in with dealing with various grants and now energy rebates, CARF schemes, it just never ends. And I think the backlogs we've got mean we're still a long way from where we were pre-pandemic. I think we lost a certain amount of impetus during the pandemic. We'd spent years on working with customers, getting them used to paying charges, and a lot of that has been lost. And people who were regular payers previously, we're now finding either have got inability to pay, or in certain cases, you're back to the days of willful refusal or culpable neglect, where people simply, not prioritising our charges, whereas they were previously, simply because we didn't go after them when they didn't pay. I think we've done some great work around, as Jonathan said already, around communication with customers. And I think our communication strategy changed entirely. And now almost every council is now fully set up for working from home, which has given an entirely new shift on work-life balance for many members of staff. And I think we've had to reorganise our teams. Ironically, I think our databases are probably more up to date than they've ever been, simply because people have given us information about areas where they previously weren't telling us. So the grants in that way have given us a bit of a boost. I think collection performance, I know today we're going to be looking at things like outturn collection stats and how people are doing, but equally it's very, very difficult to compare because there's so many different factors. A lot of local authorities came back with various elements of recovery action at very different times, either because the virtual courts weren't available to be set up. In many cases, there were political restrictions on action being taken, particularly on things like enforcement action, which again has impacted. And I think as well, if you look, for example, on things like the business rates collection figures, they were so significantly impacted by those authorities who managed to get CARF, for example, during the last financial year. And again this year on council tax for energy rebates, where authorities have automatically paid energy rebates onto council tax accounts, that will massively skew collection stats. So I think we do need to be very cautious about judging authority A with authority B, because we need to know the underlying trends, whereas previously we're pretty much comparing like with like. So I think overall, I probably the same as Jonathan just said, I'm incredibly proud of the efforts of my team and what they've managed to achieve over the past 2.5 years. But to be honest with you, I think we've probably got an equally challenging period over the next year, 18 months, to get us back to anywhere near where we were previously. And I think that's the challenge. And to be honest with you, people are just absolutely shattered. It's been a full-on 2 years, and we still need staff to be up for it. I'm up for the challenge over the coming time. And I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges, to be able to support staff, because it's still going to be a ridiculously busy time going forward.
Thanks, Nick. I think we saw Tracy pop up there for a quick second. Are you with us, Tracy?
I am. Hopefully you can hear me, but unfortunately my camera, I just can't seem to get it working.
That's okay. Perhaps you'd like to just introduce yourself to the audience, Tracy.
Okay, so Tracy Richards, Head of Revenues and Benefits at City of Wolverhampton Council.
Thanks.
So
we're just asking the panel to just tell us what the last 2 years have been like, so perhaps you'd like to tell us what's been like for you.
Yes, certainly. So really, like everybody else, the challenge was in March 2020, where we did actually manage to have our last court on the 19th of March before we were all sent home on the 20th. And really very much a local decision at officer level was, we don't want to be creating additional work at the moment now. At that time, with everybody being sent home, really everybody, all the staff trying to settle into working from home and the impact of residents of the pandemic. So all recovery action was halted, which was quickly reinforced corporately. But then the difficulty was actually reversing that decision. And our understanding was that the greater the level of debt, the harder it was going to be to collect. We started trying to convince members from July really to get recovery recommenced, and eventually got agreement in November 20 for the issue of soft letters. We also had the issue with courts, as Nick made reference to, with trying to get, first of all, hearing dates and then any reasonable levels. So our normal court levels are 2,000 a hearing. We were initially given 500 for each liability order hearing. Local courts were not interested in the virtual hearings. We're still trying to convince them to move to virtual, but at the moment we have to attend in person. We were only allowed one member of staff with one supporting. And also from a sundry debt point of view, our invoices always followed an invoice recovery path of every invoice had a reminder, and we noticed that really we wanted to be issuing that at a customer level. Certainly for care debts, we wanted to remind everybody the total level of indebtedness with every contact. But things did work well. Some new initiatives in September 20. We started working with our colleagues across the authority, Troubled Families, Welfare Rights, and our local ALMO, Wolverhampton Homes. So where there was an existing relationship, we were using a coordinated approach to review the level of debt owing, promoting and using discretionary awards, and educating residents for payment of council tax and other debts. Very resource intensive, but definitely some successes, both with raising awareness internally, but also with getting customers to actually start paying council tax. We work generically across revenues and benefits, which has definitely helped with directing staff to whatever they needed to be done. Team definitely mucked in, whether it was working on business grants, test and trace, now the council tax rebates. And it's actually, I think, council tax rebate that's had the biggest adverse impact on the service. The timing of annual billing, we're still trying to recover and pick up from where we were. But also corporately, I've always worked in district councils where basically you have to muck in and do everything as a service. But actually at a corporate level within Wolverhampton, it was very much that, it's a corporate problem. So when it came to the business grants, we had audit, insurance, everybody helping to process business grants. And the opportunity to link in with our business development team, and that has continued really through each round of business grants. We seconded a member of our staff to really gatekeep the applications for discretionary awards. And then on the corporate debt side, senior service managers and budget holders now actually have to take responsibility for invoices that are being raised and support collection. We're in very early days for that, but it's a real opportunity to ride the opportunity and not feel isolated that it's just sundry debt collection that are responsible for all the debt. And definitely training of staff to link applications for discretionary housing payments with discretionary council tax reductions, household support, alongside getting them to get the customers to pay and make arrangements for payments. So again, it's thinking of the customer as an organisation, what support can we do? And I think sort of our brief was, what would we have done differently? And for me, definitely many lessons learnt along the way, which have hopefully been, addressed with each new challenge. So, definitely initial business grants, like I said, thinking of it as purely a revenue and benefits problem. Well, actually, no, it's a corporate problem. So any new initiative now starts with a corporate task and finish group, bringing in the different service areas to contribute, and which enables a quick mobilisation. The other thing was, really, would I have chosen to have started my new job on the 1st of April 2020? But hey, it's a roller coaster, and my predecessor has reminded me that if I can get through this, then there is nothing likely to compare with it in the future. And so far, I haven't been given my P45, so I'm still here to tell the tale.
Thank you, Tracy. Alistair, can you talk?
Oh, I'm going to give it another go. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
we can hear you. Yeah.
Good. Fantastic. I feel like I need to say something really inspiring now after all that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's. I have to say, I've been in local government in various different forms for my whole career, which is getting on 30 years now. And I I have to say that when the pandemic hit, I was out of local government as a consultant. I was quietly rather relieved that I wasn't in my old role at the time. I have to say, I had tremendous sympathy for everybody who was at the time, because it was such a difficult time. Anybody who's worked in local government would realise that, and I think everybody did amazingly well. I find it very interesting that local government tends to get a bit of criticism for how it operates. But let's be honest, if central government had been asked to deliver on what local government did so successfully, it just wouldn't have happened. That's the reality. We're almost victims of our own success in that they keep giving us more and more to do because we do it so well. I think that's across the board. Um, for the authorities I was working with at the time, it was really coming out of the pandemic, um, stuck with backlogs, and some of those backlogs weren't just recovery backlogs; they were everything backlogs. And we all know that the most common reason people don't pay is they think the bill's wrong, and they think the bill's wrong because you're not up to date with your work that's coming in. And the problem was, it was fine. And I seem to recall Nick saying something similar in the middle of the pandemic, that it was fine for the government to throw new burdens money at councils, but you couldn't get people. There weren't people available to employ. So you still had a resource problem, even if government was giving you new burdens money to deliver. And so we saw a lot of authorities coming out with larger backlogs than they would normally have, delays in processing, and so it wasn't just a recovery problem; it was an administration problem that has caused a lot of the hangover, and it's that, in my opinion, that we'll need to get on top of before we see collection rates at the back end, because they're the lagging measures. Let's be honest. So the leading measures are the amount, the work, the processing that you're dealing with. So it's not until all that processing is back up to date where we want it to be that collection rates will follow.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. Gary, from an institute's perspective, looking across the sector as a whole, what have the last 2 years been like?
Um, well, having what's just been said, do I miss my days in local government? Well, probably not. But I left local government in 2004, and in the same way Alistair sort of said, my career was very much in revenues, collecting revenues, sundry debts, benefits, everything to do with that in the London boroughs. And and you can't help looking back at the challenges we had, particularly when we went from the general rate to a community charge, and all the problems trying to collect a community charge into then moving into council tax, and the difficulty trying to collect a tax when people knew the tax was going to disappear. But when you look at what we've had over the last couple of years, and you just take a step back, I think what it has really done, and I think Alistair touched on it towards the end there, that those that work in the profession always deliver. Those that work in revenues and benefits, we will always deliver. And I think from an institute point of view, I think that's where we have a responsibility as the professional body to make that case, to say that, what has actually been achieved is really quite remarkable. We've moved very much staff that are so focused on trying to collect the money to, in effect, getting the money out through the door. And what it has highlighted perhaps is the strength of the property tax system itself, in that when you look at the council tax system, it's obviously helped in terms of the energy grants recently. Business rate system has been able to be used to get money out through the door. Now, that's not to say you don't need to reform both council tax and business rate, particularly on some of the collection side and some of the reliefs. But all this is happening at the same time you're talking about sort of reviewing the tax system itself. And I think that perhaps an element of frustration, certainly from the Institute's point of view, is that if we were just dealing with one government department, and if you think of, say, DLUC as it's now called, and you were focused on DLUC and everything goes through DLUC and you're working with those officials, what you've had over the last couple of years is that you've got Bays leading on some areas, you've got HMRC involved, you've got the Treasury involved, and then obviously you've got DLUC. And there's so many meetings going on, and in many ways you do need to understand the tax system. You need to understand the consequences of what ministers want to do. Now, from an institute point of view, we are in quite a privileged position that there were large amount of meetings that were going on with more with DLUC, but did include BEIS to a lesser extent, and also with the Treasury, trying to make things work. Now, at the end of the day, the ministers made their decisions, but what we were trying to do is when you're coming up with the guidance, particularly on the rate relief guidance, is that you did have some practitioners, Chatham House meetings, trying to say, well, this isn't going to work if you do this, and this isn't going to work if you do that. So I think we've been in quite a privileged position, but I suppose the frustration is that when we look at collection rates, and we can go back to when the collection rates first came in, the collection rates don't really tell you anything really. They tell you what an in-year collection is, but they don't really tell you what sits behind. And I have to say that from an institute point of view, particularly with DLUC, we have got probably a far better working relationship as an institute, as a profession, than probably we've had for many, many years. So I think that's a good thing going forward, because everything we're doing now, you look at the wider review, and I suppose the Institute is also not just focusing on England. We've got to look at what's happening in Scotland. We've got to look at happening on Wales, and a lot is happening in council tax and non-domestic rate. And what we've got to do is make it work. And I think for business rate particularly, next year, you've got some big challenges. We haven't even got a rates bill out at the moment, which obviously is not going to come out till September. There's some big things that have got to happen. But from the Institute's point of view, we are around the table. And I think the virtual meetings has allowed a lot to happen. And I think when Tracy talks about the court on the 19th and we all go into lockdown, up until then, we always used to talk about disaster relief plans and what would happen if you have a flood or a fire. The fact is, the country changed its complete way of working overnight, and local government, they changed the way they work, particularly on the revs and benefits side. They changed their working practices, and at the same time, we mustn't forget the well-being of the staff themselves. The well-being of the staff that are working under real pressure, and in many cases, and I suppose I see this from an education side, that people were still working from home. A lot of them were studying. A lot of them were doing apprenticeships, and they're trying to balance their own personal lives, their professional lives. So I think when you take a step back and look what's happened, I think we've professionally have done really, really good. There's challenges ahead, but I think what we've actually done, we've learned a lot from over the last couple of years. And I just feel that now is the time perhaps to kick forward and make people aware that it isn't just a collection rate that tells you the story. We all want to collect the maximum amount of money. We have the same old arguments about, council tax isn't like any other debt. You can't compare council tax with other types of utility debts, perhaps, and private sector debts. And sometimes I think the frustration is you're speaking to people that have got to have council tax explained to them and business rates explained to them. But I think, we've delivered, and I think we always will deliver within the profession. So that's a very long answer, Farid, but that's really. I'll shut up now, otherwise it'll be 12 o'clock. Okay.
That's okay. Okay. I was going to give you show you some data on stats now, but given what you just said about collection rates not telling us anything, perhaps I won't. But no, I will do. Thank you for that. I think lots of interesting issues there, which hopefully in the next sort of hour or so we'll start to unpack a bit more. But let me just try and give you some context to, I think, where some of the issues that we might have seen in the past years now. Let's see how this technology works. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. Can you see what it is yet? Hopefully someone can nod and say you're seeing my screen. Okay, thank you. All right. So I just wanted to share with you some of the stats that you all have access to. So there's nothing new here that we have privileged information to, but hopefully some analysis that might help to inform our discussion this morning. So in terms of the big picture, as Gary says, and hopefully a lot of this will be not too surprising for you. I've also added in 2018, 19 to show you perhaps what the year before was, but interesting there that actually we were coming in on a slight reduction in collection rates shown by the two lines there, the pink one for council tax and the bluish one or turquoise, whichever your explanation of that colour is, showing business rates. So yes, we're on a slightly downhill trajectory coming in, but then obviously 2020-21 was the big year that saw a reduction in both collection rates for council tax and business rates, but business rates taking the bigger hit. What's interesting there is that obviously receipts of council tax in gross terms, in terms of actual or net terms rather, in terms of actual cash, did increase throughout the period. So perhaps it'll be interesting to see what people think that means in the discussion going forward. Likewise, as we'd expect, what we saw over the period is that arrears or aged arrears certainly increased, maxing to 4.9 billion last year for council tax and 2.5 billion for business rates. So as we'd all, I think, understand that clearly 2020-21 was the worst year, but was showing some signs of recovery in 2021-22. And that's what this next slide really shows, is that 20 and 21, I'll just call it 21 just to keep it shorter, I guess, was the worst year for us, and we're showing some recovery back now in 22 across most of those indicators. The biggest drop being there in business rates in 21. So going back to, well, how are we recovering then? Looking at the statistics of the latest QRC for data, and just comparing the headline collection rate for both council tax business rates for each council from 1920. If you just do a simple tally up, only 16% of councils have either equalled or exceeded what their collection rate was in 1920. So quite a lot there still waiting to get back to their level of performance pre-pandemic on council tax. Slightly better on business rates, but still, again, only 19% of authorities have gone back to their previous level of performance for business rates. If you look at the spread of improvement or decline, clearly less councils have improved, as we showed, but most where they have improved has been between 0 and 1% on their previous level of performance. But the level of spread of sort of the gap between current and previous performance is much greater, with some councils exceeding or dropping well below 5% of where they were pre-pandemic levels. But sort of numbers are both higher in terms of council tax and business rates, and a greater spread across that reduction. All these slides I will be sending out to you after the session, so you'll have access to this afterwards to look at it in a bit more detail as well. If we then look at sort of how that's split between councils and between sort of the regions, if we look at the top quartile performance, so all I did here was sort of look at those councils that had improved, and looking at the top 25% of those. Most of those were districts, and the remainder single tier on council tax. And for purposes of single tier, I've taken out London here separately. So this is just all single tier councils, unitary and Mets outside of London. And that sort of shows you from the bottom chart there that basically there are no London councils represented in that top 25% of council tax. What's good to see there is that in certainly Yorkshire, Humber, the two top performing councils are both from South Yorkshire, and being a Sheffield person, that's very, very rewarding for me. One of which, Robert, you're on the call today, so I'd be pleased to hear or see in the comments anything you can say about what your performance has been over the past 2 years. And another one is an Arum client, so I'm not saying we did anything interesting there, but just letting that out there. On business rates, slightly better performance for London here, with outer London boroughs showing some improvements in the top 25% of NMDR, but again, districts dominating the performance scales. And again, looking at the distribution across the regions, again, better improvement in the southeast and the East Midlands and the east of England there. We then look at the bottom 25% of those comparing performance in 2022 versus 19. Again, the key sort of call out here is that the London boroughs make a more of an appearance here, both in terms of council tax and business rates. And looking at the grants paid allocation, this is off the latest data from BIS. Again, London showing the lowest level of grants paid against their allocation. Again, I'll let the panel tell us what they think that means going forward. If we then look at council tax supports, overall, in terms of the, again, this is off the tax base data published by DLUC. What we see here is that from 2019, councils paid out 2.59 billion in support, and that increased in 20 up to 2.7 billion, but then decreased in 21 down to 2.6 billion. And then if you look at the change, all councils were increasing their support in 2020, but most, apart from outer London boroughs, decreased their level of support in cash terms. So this is again based on the reporting that was provided to government. And again, in all regions and in all types of council, the levels of support in the reported figures have gone down. Any members of the panel, would you like to share some observations around any of that data? Nick, how about you?
Sorry, Farid, I was just going to come in very quickly on the percentage of the grants that have been distributed. I think that is fairly clear from the London perspective that the amount the government gave us as their intended sums to be distributed was far greater than the actual expenditure was. And I think that was more down to a Bayes calculation rather than lack of ability for London boroughs to distribute. So if Jonathan would agree with that.
Caught me out. Yes, I would. We've seen a lot of cash being returned, not because we haven't allocated it. It's just there wasn't any entitlement to award it.
Gary, given what you were saying about the value of looking at collections data, what does this tell you, or what does this not tell you? Anything?
Well, very simple. It tells you what the in-year collection rate is, and if I can just perhaps take a couple of minutes for it, just to because it's a trip down memory lane, just listening to when you talk about upper quartile and lower quartile, because when I was at the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, we were one of the worst collectors in the country. And the target that we had in Tower Hamlets is that every year we had to move up a quartile. So at the end of the third year or fourth year, we were going to be in the top quartile in the country. And it was always trying to explain as to, the reality of what a collection rate is. And when I go back and just before, as I say, this meeting today, I'll look back at when the performance indicators first came in and the collection rates were first published. And they were first published in July 2001. And we always get a statement, or used to get a statement from the minister behind the collection rate. And the minister at the time was a minister by the name of Stephen Byers. And what he in effect said, statement that went with it, I can just read it. It said, collection rates have slightly improved. However, a large amount of money is still not being collected. I've looked at the figures and I believe some councils could do a lot more to improve their collection performance. This is why I'll be asking the councils with the worst collection rate for an explanation of their bad performance. I will also be asking some of the better collectors to share their good practice. What came out of that was that the 20 worst local authorities were summoned to a meeting, and it was the London Borough. So there was Tower Hamlets, Hackney, Newham, all of that. We all went to there. We all were summoned into the headmaster's study. And we also had a local authority from Surrey that had came along, very affluent area, had a high collection rate, and they were there to give the 20 London boroughs, in effect, some advice on how they can improve their collection rate. There were things like, have you thought about sending reminders to people if they don't pay? And you think, that's a good one. I didn't think of that. Well, what happens if they don't pay? Do you take them to court? Do you summons people? You think, crikey, I didn't think of that one. Or, well, when you get a liability order, do you think about using an enforcement agent? No, I didn't think of that one either. But it was trying to sort of, people to understand what the collection rate is all about. What came out of that over the years was that the ministers always put in some sort of statement, but it all got a little bit more pleasant, a bit more accepting of the standards. And what happened after those sort of first couple of years was they introduced what they called a good practice guide on council tax. This was as it was then, the ODPM, and the recommendations that came out of that on how you can improve are things like better sharing with the inland revenue, deductions perhaps beyond just benefits, perhaps look at pensions, third party orders, a standard demand notice, a good practice website that is held by the ODPM where people can share good practice, have a discussion forum. And the information letter that came out in 2002 said, we're going to take all these things forward, watch this space, it's going to happen. Every year we have, or every other year we have different things about, good practice. More recently, the document that came out was this is best practice. And I think the answer is there is no such thing as best practice, because best practice of one local authority will be different to another local authority. I think there's good practice, but when it comes down, I think, too many times people will, even if you had 99.9% collection, people would look at that other percent or that 0.1. Some of the increases or decreases, sometimes they're marginal. They're very marginal at the end of the day, and there's always a reason behind it. And sometimes when you look at the business rate side, it could just be one or two properties that skew the figures anyway. And also when you're looking at the rate base itself, you've got to also look at how many people were taken out of the collection system through the reliefs that have been given. So you're not always comparing like we're like, and councils try and compare with each other, but you've got to be very careful who you're comparing with.
That's great. I feel a lot of pain there, Gary, coming out.
Right.
Nick.
Yeah, I would just come in just to say that I think over the past few years, authorities have moved away more and more from in-year collection rates analysis. It really means nothing. We look at the surplus or deficit on collection funds, and in some ways, the arrears collection is important because that's effectively where your bad debt provision is calculated. So the more we can do on the historic arrears, particularly the amounts which are covered by 100% provision, that's our financial gains. To be honest with you, whether someone pays us on the 31st of March or the 2nd of April is really immaterial. It's a meaningless league table in some ways to have that cut off on the 31st of March. So certainly I think from London boroughs where we do a lot of internal benchmarking, we've moved away from just in-year collection and start looking at arrears performance collection as well, a lot more.
Alistair, is there any value in looking at data to understand what's happened over the last 2 years and where we can try and improve?
No, well, I was going to say, in terms of what Nick's saying, completely understand from a London borough's point of view, but if you're a district, you're going to be paying that money out to your county, whether you've collected it or not. So in-year does matter to different tiered authorities a lot more than it probably does for a London borough. I love data for it, as you well know. I love all data, so I would never say there's such a thing as too much data. I personally see in-year collection as I've mentioned already, a lagging measure for the overall performance. Now, my background originally was from the recovery side. I came into revenues as a recovery person, and early in my career, I believed it was all about recovery. It was the action you took to collect the money that mattered. As my career developed and I reached a point where I was managing the whole of the service from an end-to-end point of view, it dawned on me very quickly that actually the aim is not to have to take recovery action against anybody. The aim is to have developed your relationship with your taxpayers so that they don't fall into arrears, so that you are getting the right liability to the right person up front, that you have removed any reasons for non-payment. If a council does leave reasons, an excuse, let's put it that way, an excuse for not paying, people won't pay. That's how it works. So it's all about closing off all those reasons why somebody shouldn't pay. And that, in terms of the in-year collection rates, absolutely that is your measure as to how your service is performing from that point of view. It's not about how well your recovery is performing, it's how well your service as a whole is performing.
Okay, thank you. Tracy, just before I ask you to come in on this question, I have a question here from Nick Ducatel on the chat. He asks, given the impact of the pandemic has on council finances, what approach are you taking to corporate debt collection? Is it now a corporate priority, and what are you doing differently now, what you're doing pre-pandemic to calculate it? To tackle it. Could you answer that question, but also perhaps give us an understanding of what you're doing to understand what's happened in Wolverhampton over the past 2 years, and looking from a data or a collection perspective? Tracy, are you with us? I think we might have lost Tracy. Okay, let's move on to Jonathan. Jonathan, what kind of things do you look at to try and understand what's happening in your borough? What kind of data do you use?
On the question from Nick, are you talking, or are you from?
Oh, sorry. Yes, you want to answer one question from Nick?
Sorry, I was expecting on that. So I think we all need to recognise that there's a much needed need. We're very much needed to look at the more holistic view of the citizen. Now, actions that we take in isolation are well and truly days of that are well and truly over. We need to be looking at where the pressure is on the local authority and look together to work as one team, as a holistic service to minimise the impact on that citizen, pushing council tax debt and recovery of council tax debt where there are other priorities that are going to be affecting that household, that we're going to present to the local authority in a different front door are what we need to be thinking about. So data is key to that. We've got a lot of accessing data now is much easier. The sources of data coming together, those data sets to marry the records together have helped a lot. So it's really key. Prior to the pandemic, I'm not sure we had a lot of time for this. It's something that we've realised that coming together and both the energy grants, the business rates. Nick said our databases are far more up to date than they ever were. Energy rebates has helped that again. And we've now got to a position where we've got a lot more data about people, and we can now use that to overlay and link data sets together much more reliably than before. So I think we've got a challenge because it's now reading that data. We've talked about creating data lakes and scenarios where we can use tools to pull out the similarities in those data sets, but it's about having efficient processes that run over the top of that data to enable staff to quickly get to the trouble cases. I think it's all very well thinking it's just about a citizen that's got rent arrears and council tax arrears, but what about those that haven't got council tax arrears, but that are paying another debt? Perhaps they're paying a sundry debt in the authority and they're very keen to pay those. We need to look at why that is being paid, and it's not just about having many debts owing to the local authority from that same citizen. So there's a lot to come out of that data.
Thanks, Jonathan. Tracy, are you back with us? You're on mute. Okay. So, Gary, given your aversion to collection rates, what other information do you think councils should be using to try and understand what's actually going on within their areas when it comes to collection performance?
I don't think the collection rate. I think in the sense that it wasn't that long ago. a lot of thing was made of league tables. You know, we might put our own sort of league tables together internally, you know, in local areas, but you know, it wasn't that long ago that this sort of you know, the government's line was sort of a bit like the name and shame. We had it with some of the rate reliefs where you have the league tables of who's delivered, who hasn't, and it was trying to sort of shame those people and not delivering. And sometimes the people that delivering longer term, that's where you had some elements of fraud because they actually went too quick. I think the collection rates. I think you know, when I was you know, working in local taxation, you know, you was always a little bit on the defensive with the collection rate because I always knew on council tax where I would be, and I always knew on business rates I'd be right at the top. The same staff were doing council tax and business rates, but they were right at the top on business rate because we had Docklands. So in a way, it always skewed the figure. So it's very nice to take the praise, but obviously you then had the other side. I think you know you look at the debt, and you know, to pick up Alistair's point that you know, it's engaging. You know, yeah, a lot of it is very automated. We know it's automated because it's built around legislation, and you have to go through a cycle of every year you're then compounding the debt, and you've got to go through the standard recovery process. But it's having the time, if you had the time to really focus on individual cases and have that earlier engagement, that early engagement with the debtor, which to some extent is always a little bit too late down the road. And I think it's great to have a corporate debt approach. And obviously, the issue with corporate debt is that some of them are statute-based debts, some of them are different types of debts, and the argument there would be that you don't keep providing the service while the debt isn't paid. So it you know, and then you're looking at the council tax where every year it's just building up. But I think, you know, I think people that work in the profession, I think we actually know our debtors pretty well. We know we know the businesses that are always going to be, or the addresses, not the businesses, the addresses that cause you the problem. You know, you get to know that, but it's having that time. And I have to say, in my early days, I had the time to do all that, to look at Stubbs Gazette and all these sort of things. Now, to some extent, it's just one thing after another. But I think we do generally sort of know what's best. I think obviously again going into the home working situation, and you talk of corporate debt, it's one thing where you have everyone in the office, you can go and see someone, and you know, in different, you know, social services, you know, education, whatever. Now obviously everyone's remotely, so I think that again presents a little bit of a challenge in how you bring the different parts of the council, particularly if you've got services outsourced as well, because that again presents a different sort of challenge.
Okay, thank you. Alistair, just looking at the results of our poll that we asked the audience, to what degree of analysis have you undertaken to what degree of analysis have you undertaken on your performance for the past few years? If I get my teeth in place. 20% have taken no analysis or don't think it's useful. Alistair, what would your advice be to that 20%?
Well, I suppose it sort of leads into a sort of slight difference of opinion Gary and I have about these collection rates, because I think I would agree with Gary that comparing yourself with others is a very difficult, it's less helpful, let's put it that way. But what you can do is compare yourself with yourself from previous periods. And I'd be amazed if the thing about data that I love about data is when it proves me wrong about a hypothesis I've got. So you start with a hypothesis. I think I know the reason why this is the case. You then start collecting the data, and actually you find out that that hypothesis was completely wrong and it's something else. So the only reason not to collect any analysis data would be because you believe you know what the reason is. Well, the reason is the pandemic. It's not that simple. There are other things that happened at the same time, and we're moving into another one now. The problem is the before and after of the pandemic isn't the same place. You know, I know it's a bit of a hackneyed phrase, but people talk about the new normal. Well, we've gone from a very stable economy into a pandemic, out the other side into a cost of living crisis. So you can't say this was before the pandemic and what does it look like now, because there's other inputs that are occurring and they've got to be taken into account. I did want to also pick up on Nick's question. Is that all right if I answer
Yeah, sure, please.
Nick's question? He's talking about corporate. Let's get open it. What approach you take into corporate debt collection? I know there were a few authorities out there who were really quite advanced in the corporate debt collection approach. But if you look at the sort of bigger picture of local authority revenue across the board, and some of the other things that are happening, the focus on vulnerability, the breathing space mechanism that treats local authorities as a single creditor, the statutory debt repayment plan draft regs that are out there that again treat a local authority as a single creditor. Again, the cost of living crisis, and as John mentioned, the sort of more holistic view that councils want to take, and the avoidance of pushing cost elsewhere by taking action. Collect £1 over here and cost the council £100 over there. That type of attitude. Because of that, I think that it's highly likely that we will see a massive increase in the number of corporate approaches to debt collection. Local taxation has always performed much better because of the statutory mechanism than many of the other sort of civil debts within local government. But using the lessons from that and using the power of local taxation to create a corporate debt collection model is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. I'm just going to try Tracy again. Tracy, are you still with us?
Right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
And you might, be able to see me, but I've had to actually join from my phone.
Thank you for trying. Yes, we can see you now. Okay. Let me just feed back to you. We've had a question from Nick in our audience asking, what approaches are you taking to corporate debt collection? Is it now a corporate priority? And what are you doing differently now to what you're doing pre-pandemic to tackle collection, please?
Yeah. So yes, it is a corporate priority, and I think I alluded to earlier that actually sort of budget managers, heads of service now for sundry debt are actually being reminded of their responsibility about actually collecting the invoices that they raise. Because as we all know, as soon as an invoice is raised, it gets credited against their budget. But they're being reminded that actually, they've got a responsibility as well to make sure that it's getting paid. So what we've actually done is created a dashboard for budget managers to access so that they've got the visibility rather than the sort of financial system that really isn't a debt management system and doesn't give them access to the information they need. And then as part of their budget meetings with finance officers, it's part of the conversation. So we have a mixed approach. So I have some really good service areas who are really hot on their debts that they raise and collecting their debts, but others, and certainly from the conversations I'm holding, that really don't know what debts they raise, don't know, what the position is. So it's definitely, interesting times to see how that pans out and what impact that will actually have on improving collection of sundry debts going forward. So yeah, definitely hoping for the future, and it is a corporate priority as well.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Tracy, I was just talking to the panel about the value of using data to understand what's happened over the past few years. Obviously, in the analysis that I presented so far, we saw that a vast majority of the councils have not yet got back to those pre-pandemic levels, and Alistair was keen to stress that the new normal might be different from the old normal. Do you think the current drop performance is just a blip that will actually get back to where we were pre-pandemic soon, or do you think there are some structural changes that we need to start thinking about?
I think it's going to take us a very long time to get back to where we were. Wolverhampton, like the London boroughs, has always been a low performer in collection terms. And coming from affluent districts, when I first arrived, it's like, well, why don't people pay by direct debit? We've seen an almost 10% increase in direct debit take-up, thank you, Martin Lewis, as part of the council tax rebates. But I don't think that be retained. It'll be really hard to keep hold of people being able to manage to pay their direct debits for council tax going forward, and really picking up as well what Jonathan was saying, because I was in for that little bit, about, it's actually about educating people. So it's a very cash orientated area and city, and there's a lot of financial vulnerability, and it's what can we do as part of those conversations with residents to actually get them on the track to recognising it's a priority debt and supporting them to enable them to pay, so multiple dates for payments, etc. I think then again, picking up, I think it was what Nick was saying about arrears. It's about actually, where are we over a period of time, and what we can do in year. Often it's not enough time to get that full payment, but actually over a period of time, it's what can we do over that period to really collect the money.
Thank you. So Nick, if I think both you and Jonathan, your levels of performance are not quite back to pre-pandemic levels, what are you doing to try and get back there, or more quickly than perhaps it might be otherwise? What kind of actions are you actually taking on a day-to-day basis? Nick first, and then Jonathan.
I think, to be honest with you, we're trying everything. Certainly for my authority, we were, whilst court hearings came back a while ago, all virtual, obviously, things like enforcement agents, we've only recently gone back to using those. And there's been delays on a lot of the other alternative options that are open through a liability order, and that's through member pressure or decisions made outside of the revenue service. So I think we're trying everything. I think we need to have a look at the data around customers. I think pre-pandemic, a lot of authorities have started looking a lot more at propensity to pay, looking at historic payment records for debtors, and then able to target recovery action on those you believe are unlikely to pay. I think a lot of that went to one side because we were in that pandemic situation and everything was focused on the immediate rather than some of the more strategic planning on debt collection. So I would say we're looking at everything, but given the huge backlogs of work, it's very difficult to free up resources sometimes to do some of that more strategic planning.
Jonathan, from your side?
Yeah, so I underline everything that Nick said. I'm trying to think of how we could offer something different. I think for Redbridge, picking up maybe on the segmentation, we looked at council tax payers that fell into arrears in previous years. We segment them into where they might have received a summons, separate them out from those who are in receipt of just a reminder, and those that have not then been in receipt of a reminder before, and just prioritise those a little bit earlier in the process to maximise the amount of time that we've got to recover. Coming back to the fact that it's a cyclical debt, if we don't start that process early enough, there's just aren't enough months left in the months that will allow us to recover it. And I think that sort of comes back to some of the council tax reduction problems that we've seen. That we're looking at a scheme, whether the schemes are fit for purpose. We're looking at whether that they really do provide an equitable balance in producing an amount that's payable for all residents. So if they're in receipt of council tax reduction and it's a banded scheme, each of those bands are kind of predicated, the scheme's calculation is predicated on the fact that it's equitable across all bands. But we know we've got debtors in some of those bands that are there are greater debtors in some of those bands than others. So that suggests that the capacity to pay a bill isn't there. So we're looking closer at that. Priority of changes of circumstances that come through. So we know we've got people moving in, the property market is picking up, and there are additional benefits in billing early to some people. So we'll try and prioritise those over perhaps giving a discount. I'm not suggesting we put them off to the back, but it's about getting the bills out initially. Single view of debt we've already mentioned. And the last thing I'll just cover is it's looking at the customer offer. customer offer around access to their accounts? Is it doing what we want it to do? Is it too complicated? Even some of the banking solutions now, particularly some of the online banks, they're so slick. The sign-up processes are effortless. You can do it in several clicks. So we're looking at where we can reduce the amount of effort that a resident needs to go to make a payment or actually sign up for direct debit. Tracy said, we've done really well out of direct debit payers, and they do make up a huge proportion of our tax base. So let's try and get more over to that way that are enabled. Those that are not in a digital poverty are able to access their services online. Let's push them down that way, and then reserve the telephone line or the more easy option of picking up the phone and speaking to somebody about your account for those that really need it. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's where I think we'll try to then collect better on those that should be paying, and then put our effort into helping those that actually really need it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute and pretend to be your 151 officer and say to you, look, guys, I hear all the problems you have about pandemics and cost of living, etc. But the budget is very tight, and I need to find more money going forward to fund all the other great services that the council provides. I haven't got time to wait for you to slowly get back to where you were, and actually I want you to get even better. And how are you going to persuade me that you're doing everything you possibly can to actually maximise your collections, both in year and your arrears? Who's going to take that first? Jonathan, you were nodding your head.
Well, I'm happy to go first.
Have you had that conversation already?
well, pretty much, because it's about cash flow. Nick made the point before about the collection fund is what we should be worrying about, not the percentage collected. If the cash is coming in and you're meeting that demand, Alistair's right. The districts are going to be paying the counties. If the cash is coming in, then that's what we need to be looking at. And some of that cash will be coming in for prior years, and will be funding services in this year. So I would be looking at what the receipts are and looking at how the global debt book actually looks. And that'll be my answer for what we're doing. I think the evidence will be in the amount of effort that's going in. That we've been seeing our tax bases increase year on year with a little resource being added back. So the efficiencies need to be found inside the service. We're not getting additional resources as the base grows or as the debt grows. So if you look at the actual amount of money we're receiving, it's way beyond what it was pre-pandemic or 2 or 3 years prior to that. It's shot up enormously, particularly after 2013 and the changes regarding the council tax reduction scheme. So, we're still delivering on exactly the same resources we had back then. So I would say we are delivering.
Nick, I think you were saying that you were trying lots of different things. How are you persuading your 151 officer that you are actually doing the right thing? Is that the right time to be able to get back to high levels of performance?
I only got a new 151 2 weeks ago, Farid, so at the moment I think she's trusting everything I say, hopefully. But no, I think the challenge I've got, and I agree with Jonathan's comments, but I think we cannot stop stressing to people we are doing, as Jonathan said, everything we can with the resources we've got at the moment. If the government stopped giving us stupid grant and rebate schemes to administer, we would have more resources to be able to collect. So am I doing everything I want to do? No, because I'm still working on ridiculous energy rebate payments, discretionary schemes, etc., etc. I think once that's over, and touch wood, that will be, in the next month, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, then we will have full resources and we'll be able to start looking at everything we want to do. At the moment, we're still in a period of crisis management, to be honest with you, as we have been for the past 2.5 years. So I would probably turn it back round and say, I would be open and honest and say we're not doing everything we want to, because resources and the workload is just too much to be able to do that. So we're doing what we need to do, as Jonathan said, to keep the collection fund ticking over. But there's a lot more I want to do going forward, and that's what I'll try to stress every time.
Thanks. Tracy, how are you keeping your 151 officer off your back?
Yeah, so again, I think it's trying to make sure that we're reassuring that we are juggling everything. I've actually got the ear of the leader weekly at the moment because they're so keen on the council tax rebate, and at the end of every presentation I'm saying it's still impacting on our back office processing. So it's just trying to again get the right messages across that we have done a brilliant job over the last 2 years, but it's a balance of the cumulative effect of everything we've been doing, and we have continued to have staff undertaking training. I worked out yesterday we've got 11% of our staff undertaking training at the moment, and I'm not going to agree to any more in the short term, but it's a balance of trying to keep the skills there, and that we've got well-trained, knowledgeable staff who are delivering a service. We've also put in a lot of effort with our customer services team so that actually they're delivering a better quality service. But we recognise that there's a lot on the to-do list. There was a lot on the to-do list 2 years ago, and I've actually only just started to make some headway back looking at the to-do list of 2 years ago. We want all staff at every contact to be talking to the customer about what they owe. So if they take a change of address or a single person discount, then actually, is it, what's the debt that the customer's got? How are they paying? What can we do to help them to pay? And again, yes, I report directly to my section 151, and the ask to me is, what resources do I need to improve collection by 1%? I don't know the answer to that at the moment because it is trying to see the wood from the trees, but we're definitely looking at what are the different options that we've got, partly getting corporate support with sundry debts, part about getting every member of revenues and benefits and customer services to be thinking about how can somebody pay, are they paying, what can we do to make it easier to pay, and it's really trying to get that right balance across the board really, but it will continue to be a focus, and we need to be collecting the income to deliver the services against reducing budgets and with pressures financially. So I think we've got to find 25 million over the next 3 years as as an authority. Otherwise, we're going to be cutting services. So it is the balance of really the juggling as we continue to always juggle in revenues and benefits.
Okay, thank you. Alistair, you look like a man who always has a plan for things. Have you got a plan for getting back to normal?
Well, I feel a little embarrassed now. The authority that I've been working at for the last 18 months left the last financial year with the highest collection rates in council tax and business rates that it's ever had. So I feel a bit guilty about the position I'm in. My section 151's very happy at the minute. But what I would say is, what did we do to achieve it? It was getting back to basics and having that a more stable service. It was about getting stability back in the service, because we've all said that the grants and the reliefs and everything have been taking resource away from where it was needed. That, yes, there's no doubt about that. So my plan was to get stability back into the service and do the things that we have done for many years as well as we possibly could, and the outcome was that we managed to leave the year with really good collection rates.
I'm just looking at the poll that we shared with the audience, and just to remind the audience, please do keep sending your questions in. We've got 2 that are waiting, which I will post to the panel in just a moment. But to the question, I understand exactly what my service needs to do to improve our performance, to return to or exceed pre-pandemic collection levels. 50% of the respondents either disagree with that statement or neither disagree. I mean, should I be worried that actually there aren't more people saying, yes, I know exactly what I need to do? Alistair?
It's for me, dealing with the reliefs and the grants and everything else, I treated it similar to what we used to call the old backlog busting days, where I ring fenced it and made sure it didn't interfere with the day-to-day service as much as it was possible to do. Now, I recognise that's not always possible within the constraints of getting bums on seats to do the work, but we were able to manage to sort of ring fence it, and even with the council tax energy rebate, we've managed to try and keep that away from the core service as much as possible and treat it as a separate project so that we can keep the day-to-day work going behind the scenes.
Okay, but I mean, I think everyone is agreeing that the rebates and all the various schemes that the government have passed on to you are still causing quite a lot of or impacting the service quite much. But the second point, where, well, do you have a plan to get out? Do you have a plan to get yourself out of this particular wood and improve the service? Do you know exactly what it is you need to do? 50% of our respondents saying they're not quite sure. Jonathan, should I be worried if I was the 151 officer for the country?
Well, ever the optimist, 50% don't know, 50% do know. So that's a positive. I'm going to put that spin back to you, Farid. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's still a large number that aren't certain. It comes back to the quality of the resources that we've got. I mean, it's great if you've got the ability to perhaps develop a plan where you can ring fence an arrears book or a backlog. But as Nick was saying earlier on, well, the resources, although the government can say, oh, here's the new burdens funding, the resources aren't there to throw at a project often. It's a huge issue for us, trying to attract the right talent and keep that talent. And I think that's where we're going to have to develop those plans. And I'm not surprised that 50% are saying they don't know, because they haven't got the ability to come up with a plan. There's the resource there. So developing an argument that's financially that works financially for the organisation is where we probably need to look at, and supporting each other around business plans and the business cases that do get through, that do develop those ideas. There'll be some useful shared working on that.
Thanks, Sean. Nick, Simon Hamilton asked a question. How can we recruit and retain experienced and qualified staff? There appears to be a lack of quality in the market, with experienced staff retiring and with hybrid working. There's more choice for employees to have flexibility in choices. How do we attract new people to join the industry? What are you doing? You raised earlier that the issue of resourcing. What are you doing in Ealing to try and tackle that problem?
I think the first thing I'd say is very difficult. I think with the amount of additional work we got, and we did get some fairly, I wouldn't say generous, but realistic new burdens funding amounts, but it's been increasingly difficult to get new staff in. And I think for a lot of people who are still, as you say, in that hybrid working, the old days of sitting next to someone and learning from them is no longer there. So we've had to, in terms of recruitment and training, we've had to take a new approach. I think a lot of it is around making the work environment as attractive as possible. And, hybrid working does help to a certain extent. I've got people now who historically everyone would live within, maybe an hour's travel of the office. Now I've got people living at the other end of the country who, are working from home almost full time. And I think that's something else that will change going forward. I think in terms of experienced staff, we are a relatively niche industry. It's something that if you are, for example, a rating expert, you can't just go out and get them off the street. They're normally working for another local authority. So that's the difficulty we've got, and it's working out some of the functions that could be done without the need for a member of staff who may have 10 years experience. So, for example, we've got a proactive arrears team that we've set up who are doing outbound calling. Now we're specifically targeting staff there who've got no revenues experience. And the good thing is that some of those people, we've had the team for 3 years, have now progressed and are doing things like they're now council tax officers. A couple of them are studying for IRRV qualifications. And these were people who we got off the street effectively with no revenues experience. And I think sometimes we need to take a step back and take a different approach. Whereas historically, we probably all just put out adverts wanting someone who has got 5 years council tax or business rates experience. And I think apprenticeships, which probably Gary could add, add a bit more on, has also assisted with that for a lot of authorities.
Thanks, Ian. Tracy, you mentioned earlier that you've got your revenues and benefits teams working together. Is this a way of tackling this challenge with recruitment?
Yeah, so this has been something in place now for quite a few years at Wolverhampton, and I think it was with diminishing of housing benefits, thinking well actually resources move more towards collection and the recovery, but also we've got a very high age staffing as well. So I think over 50%, 50 plus. So it's trying to get the right balance really. But we do recognise the training, and I'm very conscious that the level of knowledge and experience is disappearing. So there's been a lot of retirements of really experienced staff over the last couple of years. So strongly, supporting both the IRRV, studying and apprenticeships as an organisation, but also leadership and management courses. So we've had a lot of internal promotion over the last couple of years. Brand new management team, 3 out of the 4 internally promoted. We did nick one of them from Birmingham, but actually most of the recruitment and promotion has been internally. And so it's really looking probably at apprenticeships, really at the in level to the service. And really still recognising that training is so crucial to retaining staff. We did manage again through hybrid working. One of the staff said, I'm going to go and live in Cornwall and they've offered me a job. And it's like, well, no, stay with us and you can work hybrid and pop back to the office maybe, once every couple of months. So, it is keeping those options open. We also are all flexible, which means we predominantly work from home, but we've now got a bank of 25 desks at the Civic Centre that staff can actually use when they want to. Teams are going in probably at least once a month, maybe once a fortnight, using the bank of desks. But for those staff, that want to work alongside colleagues, then they do. And anybody new coming in, they will work at the Civic alongside colleagues, because there is that benefit of working alongside people to learn the job, alongside any formal training, really.
Alistair, then I'm going to come to Gary. Alistair, is the situation different in Peterborough?
No, it's all the same problems. I think, let's be realistic, pay levels are a problem. It's seen as an entry job within local government. One of the worst things was when we got categorised as a transactional service rather than a professional service, because then through the job evaluation process, salaries were based on it being a transactional job, and it's far more complicated than that. It's far easier to get it wrong and cause a lot of extra cost. The thing I would like to see come back are more career grades, where we invest in those people. So Tracy's talking about people who have, in effect, been on a career grade because they've developed through their organisation and then chosen to leave. And what we, at the end of their careers, hopefully, but what we need to do is sort of replicate that with younger people coming in, that we can offer a career grade. And it won't surprise you to hear that I'm a massive believer in the IRRV qualifications. I know Gary's there smiling. I can see him pleased up with it. But, whether it's the apprenticeship, whether it's a full qualification or the technician is a really good foundational sort of qualification that assists you to develop your experience, because you know the law behind it. It did wonders for me, and I would highly recommend it to anybody. But I think that's how we have to think. In terms of managing people, it's been different for everybody, or difficult for everybody, I should say. we're all getting used to managing people differently. I mentioned already that I've been working with this authority that I'm at currently for 18 months, and I have only met one member of staff face to face, and that was at the spring conference, because she happened to go to Leeds. I encouraged her to go, don't get me wrong, but I met her for the first time, and I've been there 18 months. So it's going to become a world where we have to manage outcomes rather than inputs, I think, because we're never going to go back to the office environment that we were in, whether people want to or not. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But it's going to be about achieving outcomes, about completing processes rather than how many inputs that person has been involved in. It's about achieving resolution at the earliest point of contact and reducing the transactions rather than making the transactions cheaper.
Thanks, Lester. Gary, from the Institute's perspective, looking across profession, what are you doing to address some of these issues that the audience is raising?
I think the first thing I would say that I've been sort of teaching students now probably more longer than some people have been born on it today, over 40 odd years. And I remember when I started teaching, I was trying to sort of say to students, bear in mind a lot more older than me at the time, is that there couldn't be a better time to get a qualification. And I've probably said that continuously throughout all those years because there's always going to be, in my view, a property tax system. There's certain trades that will always be out there, but if you can get a qualification, you're a very marketable individual, and that was before you look at the environment we're working in today. And I still think that is the case. And I think that what we've seen as an institute, and Jonathan kicked this off, and I think it's very, very noticeable as an institute that a lot of very, very experienced people across the country have retired. They've got to very senior roles. They've retired. You lose them from the institute, and the people that come in at those levels, and whether it's not so much a chief financial officer, particularly a revs or benefit manager, they come in from outside the profession, and that can sometimes be quite difficult for the institute to get a foot into that authority when you haven't got necessarily a revenues or benefit manager that's come the profession. Now, you then got to think, well, how do we as an institute address that? And this is, bottom line for the profession as the IRRV is that ever since we were formed all those years ago, we are an education body. That's what we are. That's what we were set up to be, and that's what we still are today. But it isn't just a case of qualification. It's educating the profession. It's raising the professional standards right across the local government side, the valuation side, the private sector, the public sector. And we have found a lot of our, certainly in the business rate side, a lot of our experienced rating practitioners that have gone through our qualifications have then now moved into the private sector and are now working for private sector companies. Now that's a good thing for the profession, but what it has done is it leaves that vacuum within the local authority. What we are doing as an institute, and it's great to hear what Alistair and what Tracy said and what Nick and Jonathan said about the apprenticeship, because the apprenticeship is a new thing for the institute. It's bringing people in from outside of local government often, but out because they can't really have any skills at the moment within revs and bends. That's the whole idea of an apprenticeship. Whereas when you look at, for example, people going on to the technician level, invariably they are people that are already working in revenues and benefits. So both have their place. What we've got to do as an institute is hopefully to retain those people, primarily within the profession, but also within the institute itself. Now, what we are doing as an institute, and only a couple of weeks ago we had this discussion within council, that we're trying to look at our whole strategy of education, the professional qualification, which is the technician, the diploma, the honours. We've obviously got the apprenticeship, we've got CPD, we've got vocational. What do employers want? And it goes back to the question that Simon's raised. What do employers actually want? Not just what the institute wants, but what do actually employers want for their workforce? So that is something we're looking at to work on at the Institute at the moment. It's not just looking at one area in isolation. We've had to move our delivery of our professional qualification from a day release face to face. But to be honest, that only really run in one area of the country. Our virtual delivery now of virtual pre-exam course, live sessions with tutors, when you sort of try and then look at the end result, we are getting, the results come out next week. We're getting some pretty good results. But what we've got to try and do is hang on to those individuals. If I just finally finish and just answer Simon's thing about sort of recruiting, the one thing I would say to all of you is that we've got over 200 local authorities in our forum service. All of them have free access to what we call jobs online. You can advertise all your jobs for nothing. Obviously, it's on the website, but when you get the newsletter on a Monday evening, all the current jobs in the profession are advertised there. So, bear in mind that goes to around 6,000 people. So you can advertise your jobs. Okay, if you want to hang on to staff, you may not want to see all these jobs going on. But an individual is so much more marketable for the reasons that people have said, because you could be in Cornwall, you could be whatever. That individual is a very marketable person because they can bring the skills, and hopefully that allows you to retain, as Tracy said, someone that's going to Cornwall. You can hang on to them, and Cornwall don't take that person away from you. So I think that there's a lot the Institute can do, but I think the reassuring thing is we are doing something about it. And as I say, and under Alistair's presidency, and obviously Nick is on council, that is something we're looking to develop now. And part of that will be engaging with the employers, because this is what the employers want. When Tracy quite rightly says, there's a time commitment. You can't just spare people overnight. Well, we need to know what those issues are so we can deliver not just a qualification, but how we actually deliver the course itself. And that's what we're doing at the moment from the Institute side.
Certainly, Alistair, Gary, when I was a previous head of performance in a number of councils across the country, I'd always be saying to all of my service areas, okay, fine, where's your workforce plan? Do you have a workforce plan which sets out what your current challenges are and how you're going to meet them? Okay, to what extent are you seeing robust workforce plans across services across the country, and how they're coming to you saying, actually, these are where the specific gaps are that we need the Institute to support us to complete? Are you seeing that type of behaviour within the service? Gary?
I haven't seen anything in particular. I think, often the training budget is the budget that people see cut first. When I look at the last 2 years, and obviously that's really what we've been focusing on to some extent today, can any of the managers really spare staff to start doing a professional qualification when they're dragged on, to here, there, and everywhere? And we found that with our apprenticeship, that so many of our apprentices went on breaks in learning because of our niche apprenticeship. They had to be working on everything else, and that was the real challenge for them, apart from the well-being and everything else that goes with it. So the training budget was often the first thing that was cut. The advantage of the apprenticeship, if there is an advantage, to the extent that obviously councils are paying a levy. So obviously what they're doing is obviously they're paying the levy and they can use that for the apprenticeship. What we find in revs and bends is, you often have to compete with a pot of money, because that pot of money the council might use on other types of apprenticeships. But the key thing is getting the right individuals to do an apprenticeship. It's got to be the right person. Someone is going to commit to working, say, for 18 months, but also the employer's got to, in effect, allow them 20% of their working week on the apprenticeship. And let's be honest, over the last couple of years, that's very hard for an employer to do that. The other side of it is all apprentices have to have mentors. And when everyone's working from home, that in itself presents a challenge. But that is why when we're looking at the results we're getting now, anyone that achieves their apprenticeship, it's a huge credit to that individual. It's a huge credit to the mentor, and it's a huge credit to the employer. So I'd like to feel that, the importance of having experienced professionals in revs and bends has come to the fore on everything that's happened in the last 2 years. And hopefully, when people are having to fight for their budgets in local government, the importance of having people, and I'm obviously very protective and very biased to the profession, But if you want to have frontline services, you've got to collect the money, and that's why you've got to invest in people working in rivers and bends.
Thanks, Gary. Jonathan, I'm just looking at our latest poll, asking what capacity do people have to focus on improvement activity. Not surprisingly, lots of people saying, the vast majority saying that they're struggling to keep up with everyday needs, is just pretty much what most members of the panel have mentioned as well. How are you in Redbridge trying to both deal with the everyday needs, but also try and make some capacity to actually focus on things you need to improve, which ultimately might then help you deal with those day-to-day needs?
Well, I think it's the classic, you need to make time rather than find the time within, or find the capacity. It's about a plan. At Redbridge, we're very much in this position prior to the pandemic, actually, and some of the initiatives we put in, and we've spoken before for it, and I think most of the members attending today will know that we've worked together with Arum to find those opportunities within our service to try and draw out where there are some quick wins, plus some more longer term objectives around that optimization of our service. Very easy to continue doing the same old thing but isn't that the definition of madness? It's just repeating and repeating and expecting something to change. So we went into that with an open mind to try and find some opportunities. And sadly, the pandemic came along before we could really get going on some of that. But a majority of that work continued, or certainly the quicker stuff continues straight into the pandemic. So I would encourage anybody to, when you think you can't, you don't have the capacity, is try and make the capacity and look at opportunities to do so. They will be there. So it's a case of making it rather than finding it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Nick, is the situation any different for you in Ealing, and what are you doing to try and make some of that capacity for improvement?
No, very similar to Jonathan. I think we are looking to get our strategy going forward about how we can improve. I think we need to take a step back and look over the past 2 years. I think we need to look probably even before that. I think there was elements of service we probably all wanted to improve before the pandemic even hit us. And I think the other thing we need to be aware of is future work which is coming down the track. We've got the reval coming up very shortly, and that's going to have significant impact for local authorities. So we need to be able to look at the bigger picture about what else we've got coming over the next year, and make sure that's equally factored into any strategic planning you're looking to do.
Casey, do you have any advice for people trying to make capacity for improvement?
Yes, I think again it's surprising what you can do. So whereas we thought we were only focused on grants and just taking over with everything else, actually reviewing what was on our project plan, yes, we were still managing to move forward on some things, but it's done alongside everything else. So again, we had identified sort of, before the pandemic, definitely from a recovery point of view, we really needed a focus review. And certainly we've just actually working with Arum now on a deep dive. In some ways, I know a lot of what I need to do, but we need that driver to help it to happen now. So you get to a point where you can put in lots of changes, make sure you've got all the recovery modules in Northgate and all the basics, but you almost get to a point where actually no, I need somebody with that sort of the distance to sort of be that critical friend of actually, are we heading in the right direction, and what are the streamlines that we can, and the efficiencies that we can find, and because we need to really maintain a momentum and keep going, and there will continuously be pressures, new initiatives, hopefully not new grants and everything else that we've had to deal with, but revs and bends, it's a massive and if you've got both, if you've got benefits and revenues and sundry debts, then it's enough to keep anybody busy. And you certainly, as I tell any new staff coming in, you will never be bored in this job, because there's always something. And in some ways, again, when you touch on the sort of staff recruitment and retention, it's such a varied area that actually, if certain staff have got different skill sets, that actually you can often find a niche within the service for them. So if they're not great talking to the customers, but they can work within the systems. And so, and again, I think it's using the strengths of the team that you've got to the best advantage that you've got as well.
Alistair, very quickly, if you don't mind answering Simon Hamilton's question, is committal to prison still a viable recovery option in 2022 and the future? And then again, your advice for making space for improvement.
Okay, well, it still exists in the legislation for the moment in England. Obviously, it's gone in Wales, but it still exists. So it's a viable option. Your chances of getting, it depends what you want to get out of it. I got asked the same question in the committee of inquiry, really. The thing is, the coercive effect of committal is still as strong as ever. So where you've got no other sort of recovery options left, it's come back from the enforcement agents. To be able to write a letter saying, look, we have no other options but to consider applying for your committal to prison, it will result in some communication from some people. It naturally will. In terms of actually making an application to commit, it's cost prohibitive now. I think the cost of doing so means that it's less viable financially, but it's viable legislatively. And to be fair, the courts have their own set of problems. It's sort of widely acknowledged that the courts have difficulties with the numbers that they're dealing with at the moment, and adding to that is probably not entirely socially responsible in terms of making applications for committal to prison when they're unlikely to be committed to prison. It's not something. Bearing in mind, I cut my teeth on this in community charge days when I was there 3 days out of 5 in the remand court with people that have been arrested. In the days when the police used to arrest people, so it does work. But it's cost prohibitive, is what I would say.
We just had a quick question from Susan Rickard asking, are any of you part of the HMRC data match pilot? Are any of you part of that pilot?
Yes.
Yeah. Jonathan, could you quickly take that question? Have you found the results encouraging and recovered anything on AOE?
Well, I don't think it's any secret that it didn't quite turn out as was intended, but that's mainly much to do with the relationship between HMRC and the DWP. There is some encouraging outcomes, that we've got some new data. Some of it we're still working through to actually turn that into actions that we can then follow through to liquidate our debts. But it's early days, I think, on whether it's actually going to make a groundswell of difference. It should be slicker because we've taken a long time. I think it's took nearly 12 months to actually turn that data around into us to reprocess. So we're not going to be rushing to say that it's been a huge success, because until it becomes a BAU operation, I'm not sure we can really draw a lot of joy from it. It's been an interesting exercise in terms of being part of this pilot. It was the first one. It was the first one for us. I know that it's the second pilot overall, and I think there are authorities that may see a difference in the two pilots that have got better insight. But for me, the delays haven't been great, and therefore ain't any outcomes that we'll eventually get.
Did I hear someone else say yes?
Yeah, no, we are. I'm very similar to Jonathan. I think probably hasn't, as Jonathan said, delivered as we'd expect to. But having said that, I think that the amount of work that's gone into it so far and the progress that's been made, I think there are some encouraging signs for the future, but there still needs some more refinement to be done before it's really fit for purpose.
Okay.
Sorry, could I just ask, because I haven't been part of it, and it's been a bit frustrating really as a sort of revenues professional, that not having very much information about this trial at all, which I think is sort of been a bit unhelpful. And I'm not blaming the local authorities for that. It's the government departments that have been coordinating it. I think they needed to give more information to others. For me, the thing that I've always wanted to know is what is the measure of success? So I got the feeling that in the early days, the suggested measure of success was how much of a data match you got. Whereas actually, the measure of success is how many attachments, actually viable attachments, I should say, you've been able to set up through it. So I sort of got the feeling you might find lots of work details for people where actually the attachment was almost worthless to the authority. Is that the case or not, Nick?
Do you want to go first, Nick?
Nick, do you want to go first?
Yes, to a certain extent. I think if you look at the comments that Robert Cutts has just made, I think that sums it up perfectly, that the results in the first pilot were excellent. I think the second pilot has been disappointing. I think to a certain extent, HMRC haven't wanted to give too much more information until they've got a product that they believe is fit for rollout to the rest of the country. So, I mean, certainly we had the lead officer who was one of our opening speakers at IRRB conference last year, who gave some, very detailed data about the responses that had happened. Do I think it's been a resounding success? No. Am I pleased I'm part of the pilot? Yes, because it's had some encouraging results. But I think as it's refined and it is then fit for national rollout, I think we'll suddenly see a lot more information coming out. Alistair?
Jonathan?
I think our experience been terrible in terms of the way it's operated. The data that's come back has got a good match, which suggests that we've got quality data being held by the authority, and it does match to some degree to the DWP and HMRC data sets as well. But the data that came back was very fragmented in terms of the amount of usable data in terms of taking that to an attachment. So my measure of success needs to be really around we participated, we took part in this exploratory piece of work. It was hopefully we can continue to refine that and make that usable as a business as usual operation. That'll be a good outcome. Am I going to be able to turn 6,000 liability orders into 6,000 attachments? No, it's probably going to be less than 1%. So is the amount of work worthwhile? I've got to say probably no. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be trying to make this work, and we'll continue with every effort we can to be part of this project, because I think it is the right way to go. But perhaps just a final point was on, should the measure of success be on attachments? Probably not either, because if we can notify the debtor that we've got the information and get that engagement through to liquidating a debt, brilliant. That's all we need. We don't need to measure it on an attachment. I think measure it on engagement and then ultimate recovery, however that might be.
Surely then you should say that actually you should have multiple measures of all of it. Those things are valid, aren't they? Because some things you say where you have engagement that will result in other types of recovery where you're actually collecting cash, then directly that's great. So I think it's about measuring all those various outcomes and understanding what works best and or where things are working well and where they're not, making changes or moving your resources elsewhere. Okay, so that's bringing us to the end of our panel discussion. Thank you very much for everyone on the panel for your contributions this morning, and to the audience for questions. What we'd like to do in the last few minutes, perhaps just spend some time sharing with you what Arum and the ARV and how we can help you tackle some of the issues today, particularly the one about not being as clear as perhaps you could be about what do we do. So we've all talked about the challenges that we've had over the past 2 years and the continuing challenges that we're facing, particularly with the aftermath of the all these grant and rebate schemes. As I think Alistair said, the new normal is things are going to be difficult for a while, and many members of our panel clearly aren't expecting things to change very quickly. So in response to that, what the IRV and Arum have done is come up with a proposition that we talked about at the Spin conference, which is a way in which we can help you to actually come up with a plan to tackle the unique challenges that you face within your area. So if I might just share my screen for a second, I'll tell you a little bit about that. So what we are proposing is that a joint team of specialists from Arum and the ARV would work with you and your teams to understand what the situation is within your local area, and to come up with a very practical plan. And I think that's the key word, is things that you can do in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term, tackle your unique challenges and circumstances, and to get you to a position where your performance is better than what it is today. And what we'll be doing is focusing on two key areas, or two key outcomes, certainly, which is to ensure that there is an accurate bill to be which is given to the debtor, whether that's business rates or council tax. And I know Alistair's comment earlier that when he was saying that most of the challenges that he gets are in terms of, or difficulties he faces when collecting revenue, actually relate back to an incorrect bill in the first place. And therefore, if you're trying to collect the right amount, then that improves your collection data, because ultimately you're very clear on what it is you're actually trying to collect, and certainly it helps the bill payer understand what they're generally needing to pay to you, and avoids any of those processes that they go through in terms of challenging that and delays that incurs ultimately in recovery. So two outcomes that we would help you to try and address would be to make sure that you are sending an accurate bill out, so people are paying the right amount at the right time. And then secondly, that where you are in an arrears situation, whether it's in-year arrears or multi-year, previous year arrears, that you have a clear strategy for dealing with all those different variations of customers, the different segments that you might face, and ultimately you have a plan for tackling those different segments, and you are doing the right actions at the right time to collect the income. So we'll be looking at policies and practices in terms of some of your discretionary schemes and how they're working, giving you some advice about how they could be different. I mean, we would also look at, to the extent to which, some of those legacy issues of the various schemes that you've been doing, the extent to which they are still impacting your service and how you might overcome those, but more importantly, some of the risks you might face. You've all distributed lots of money over the past 2 years on the proviso that the government can claim some of that back from you if you've done it incorrectly, or if they consider you've done it incorrectly. So again, managing some of those risks around grants and how they've been distributed, and what you might do to protect yourselves around that as well. So looking at a thorough assessment of your billing processes and making sure that you are doing that as effectively as you can be. And then again, on the arrears side, as I said, making sure all of those practices are the best practices they can be, but certainly where we as Arum are able to provide some advice and guidance is looking at what different organisations in different sectors are doing, and bringing that best practice to your unique circumstances, making sure that actually it helps you in your circumstances, and it's not just things that might be pie in the sky that sound good, but ultimately are not very, very implementable in your local context. So the benefit of us supporting you with that is ultimately that you have experts in both billing and in collections from the IRV and from Arum supporting you. And as you've heard from today, the people that come to support you are people who have had many, many years of practical on-the-ground experience delivering revenue services and in collecting revenues from both public and private sector customers. All of these services are flexible and tailored to your local needs. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's about giving you a unique and personalised service that ultimately addresses your short-term and long-term issues, and that we are giving you some practical advice around how you can do that within your current technology and investment as well. I think that's pretty clear. It's very easy to say to people, yeah, you just need to change all your IT and everything will be fine. We recognise that those things aren't as easy to do, and in some cases virtually impossible to do, certainly in the short term. So it's about giving you advice around what you can do using your existing technology, or applying some workarounds with things that are readily available on the market, so that you'll be able to do very, very quickly. And ultimately, our aim is to support you to collect more revenue more quickly at less cost, but also making sure that the practices are fair to customers, and you're dealing with vulnerability, particularly now in this challenge we have with cost of living, and making sure that ultimately those customers are paying the debt that they owe, but in a way which is sustainable for them and for you over the long term. So that's a service that we have available to you, and we're able to give to you at fairly short notice, depending on how you need it. Gary, as the from an institute's perspective, and how do you feel about that, and what kind of feedback have you had in terms of the need for this going forward?
Yeah, I think my sort of touching on a little bit what I've said earlier, that we have so many documents telling us what we should do in terms of good practice, best practice. It is very much the case that you've got to look at each council separately. And when I made comments earlier about the collection rates, I think the collection rates have a place, but very much for you to look at your own performance from one year to the next, whether you've gone down, gone up, could you have gone higher? If you've gone down, why have you gone down? And look over a period of time. And obviously we're doing it on the back of, obviously we're coming out of a pandemic. But I think from the institute point of view, I think what we're looking to do, and I think this is what the professional body or as an institute we should be doing, is that we want to work with organisations that can very much assist local authorities as we move forward, particularly on through the through the pandemic, and bringing in the practitioners that have an understanding of some of the issues that councils are facing, whether they be unitary, whether they be a district. So I think what we're trying to do is that we want to work with local authorities in lots of different ways. We touched on the education side earlier, but when we're looking at the collection rates, supporting you, getting behind some of the issues, and that's where the expertise of Arum come in, because they can do a lot of the sort of the analytics that well, I personally feel would be really helpful. I've listened to what people have actually said that have actually used the service, and it really has benefited them, and it's helped them, particularly when they're then speaking to their chief financial officer, to their elected members. But what we can bring to the table from an institute point of view is that we can bring the practitioners that understand the issues, and by using that alongside of what Arum can do, we think that this is a win-win for Arum, the professional body, but particularly the local authorities out there. So, as I say, we're very pleased to be supportive of everything that Farid has just said.
Okay, thank you for that. More details are available, so please do drop us a line if you'd like to understand more about how it's done and some of the details around that. There'll be a survey coming out to you after the end of the webinar with a link to the actual video itself, so you can review this webinar. So please do take the time to tell us what you think and how we can improve going forward. That just leads me to thank our panel for their time this morning, Gary, Alistair, Jonathan, Nick and Tracy. And we look forward to seeing you on a webinar sometime soon. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.